panel in Captain Planet and the Planeteers number 5, which comes out this week, September 17th, where one of the bad guys calls one of the Planeteers a snowflake. As a general rule, if you find yourself in any given situation using the word snowflake in a derogatory manner, and you're not, like, being funny or ironic or something, you might want to check yourself, because there's a decent chance you're the bad guy. In fact, more than a decent chance. So in this issue, Lucian Plunder has made copies of the various Planeteer rings, and has turned himself into Captain Pollution, who's like the antithesis of Captain Planet. Also, as a general rule, if your name is Captain Pollution, check yourself. There's a decent chance you're the bad guy. We've kind of got an Infinity Gauntlet type thing going with Captain Pollution and the 5 rings and this panel. It's fair enough, I guess. We find out a little bit about Kwame's backstory in this issue. And what's more, he does something with his Earth powers that I don't think I ever saw him do on the cartoon show. Granted, I don't have it memorized, but it was pretty cool. You know, when you're writing the first chapter of a team book, and you have to introduce all the various characters, it can get kind of messy, and inevitably certain team members, certain hero characters can kind of fall into the background or even fall by the wayside because it's not an easy thing to do. You've got to introduce these people and you've got to keep the story moving. But I've been pretty impressed with Captain Planet up to this point for how well all the Planeteers seem to be developed and established, and you know, they're not fully three-dimensional yet, but I have a good sense of who all 5 of these people are. And that's not always an easy thing to do. So if you want a sense of how ADD I am, I just realized that Jay Lee and June Chung are doing Spotlight variant covers for each of the Planeteers. So yeah, for this issue we have Guy, and then for previous issues we've had Kwame and Wheeler and Linka. I can only assume Mati is next, and, you know, for somebody who grew up with these characters, that's a pretty cool thing to see, especially from an elite-level artistic team like Lee and Chung. So, Punisher Red Band number 1 isn't the kind of thing I normally go for. It's not really my flavor of ice cream. You know, the whole blood, gore, and violence for the sake of blood, gore, and violence kind of thing. But I picked this issue up hoping against hope, basically, that it would overachieve. And you know something? For the first few pages, at least, it kinda did. So I don't really know what's going on here in terms of, like, the backstory and what Frank Castle has been doing. But when we open this issue, Frank Castle, the Punisher, has amnesia, but he's still got his, like, violent urges, his urges to punish the bad people. But little does he know there's a hidden force at work, kind of pulling the puppet strings, and he's about to be drawn into a violent conflict between the gangs of New York City. This issue has a really nice opening scene. I mean, not nice in terms of what the subject matter is, but you know, it's nicely executed, it's well written, well drawn, it sets the mood really well, it drew me in, which is of course what an opening scene is supposed to do. But from there it kind of tapers off and becomes what I expected it to be in terms of violence versus substance, I guess. And hey, you know what? The issue delivers what it advertises. You can't accuse it of not doing that. I will say that the more graphic execution does wonders for the villains in this book. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but if you're familiar with, like, the gangster characters of New York City in the Marvel Universe, you can probably figure it out. So yeah, I don't necessarily anticipate myself coming back for more on this one. But you know what? Hey, for those of you who like this kind of thing, enjoy. Actually, you know what? One more thing. There's a Frank Miller variant cover for this issue that actually looks better than I imagined a Frank Miller Punisher cover would look in the year 2025. So you know what? There's another win for Punisher Red Band #1. The Star Wars universe's king of badassery and cool is back in Star Wars Boba Fett Black, White, and Red #1. So yeah, Marvel is doing a Black, White, and Red book with Boba Fett. They've previously done one with Darth Vader and Darth Maul, and now it's Boba Fett's turn. The gimmick, of course, is that everything is in black and white except for the color red. So it makes for like a unique reading and viewing experience. I don't know if this is so much the case for young Star Wars fans now, but if you were growing up in the 90s, like pre-Phantom Menace, of course, Boba Fett was the undisputed king of badassery and cool in the Star Wars universe, at least as far as, grade school boys were concerned. And remember, back then, there was no Attack of the Clones. We didn't know Boba Fett's backstory. He was just kind of this mysterious, quiet guy with a cool-looking costume, some fun gadgets, and an awesome spaceship. So he sort of had this intangible factor of, coolness and mystery. And I think in putting together a book like this, the best thing you could hope for, at least as far as fans who are my age, is to recapture some of that coolness, that aura, that I would argue has sort of been watered down over the years. I think this Black, White, and Red book does that to a large extent. This is Boba Fett the way you remember him, and in a lot of ways it's the way he was meant to be. In this issue, Boba Fett gets wrangled by the Empire into hunting someone in a volcanic star system. But if you know the Boba Fett character, you know he doesn't get wrangled easily. So a twist will likely be coming for the Empire in the end. The art, of course, here looks great by Chris Allen. I like this shot in particular with the colors and the texture. It, gives you a sense and an idea of what a volcanic system actually is. And our author Ben Percy is on point here. It really captures those vintage Boba Fett vibes. It's funny, I just got done talking about another Ben Percy issue that came out last week, Punisher Red Band #1. And in addition, one of the things I really remember Ben Percy for is Sabretooth War, the Wolverine and Sabretooth story, where Sabretooth violently massacres a bunch of kids. This story is rated T, so there's nothing overtly gory or super duper disturbing in here, but it does kind of make you wonder what Ben Percy would give us if the reins were off, you know what I'm saying? Some tremendous cover game for this issue as well, not just by Alex Maleev, who does the main cover, but Kari Andrews chips in with a piece of business that I think is just phenomenal. All in all, Boba Fett has rarely looked better. I'm not going to ramble about the Jimmy Kimmel story this morning, even though there's a part of me that really wants to. The only thing I'm going to say is that it's very important for people to not just understand that his show was pulled from the air, but why his show was pulled from the air, and what that means, and what that sets a precedent for in the grand scheme of things. And interestingly enough, this does kind of tie into the issue that was already on my agenda for this morning anyway. Captain America #3. So to reiterate, this story places Captain America's re-emergence from the ice in I think the early to mid-2000s, during the conflict in the Middle East. And in this story, we've met a character named Dave Colton, who is essentially the modern-day super soldier. He carries Captain America's shield and kind of fights for the U.S. military. We see some flashbacks for him in this story and some of the trauma that he went through during the Iraq War and the conflict in the Middle East. And all the while, Steve Rogers, Dave Colton, and U.S. forces have infiltrated Latveria, which is Doctor Doom's home country. So naturally, that promises a conflict in and of itself. It feels like this issue does a nice job of conveying the everyday horrors of war and, what I'm sure many, many troops actually witnessed and experienced in Iraq and the Middle East. I don't know that for a fact. I didn't serve, but it feels like it's probably true. I'm really into Marvel's One World Under Doom story, which is one of their big event comics that's coming out right now. And even though this story is by a different author, it does feel like it is an interesting sort of tie-in with One World Under Doom, even though that's not officially the case. Because, we have scenes in this issue where Dr. Doom is showing Steve Rogers Latveria and how the people there are, thriving under Doom's dictatorship. And naturally, Steve Rogers comes back with the argument that it's prosperity and comfort at the price of freedom, which, rings true. And there's a panel in here where Dr. Doom says that America uses words like freedom and democracy to cover up the atrocities and horrors that it's culpable in. And that's kind of what made me think of the Jimmy Kimmel thing this morning. Not because what happened with him is such a horror and an atrocity, but, the fact that we continue to use words like freedom and democracy, but do we really understand what they mean? Or what they're supposed to mean? The Doctor Doom character really shouldn't be right about America as much as he is these days. When the story started, I was interested to see how Steve Rogers would come to the realization that he needs to stand for and represent not necessarily the American government, but American values and what they're supposed to be. And by the end of this issue, we kind of are getting into that territory. So I'm very curious to see what's next. In the context of a comic book, or I guess any story really, does predictable always mean bad? I would argue not necessarily. But does predictable mean bad in the case of The Slasher's Apprentice number 5? Let's talk about that. So in this, the final chapter of the story, the Hopton Valley Killer and their new apprentice Riley collide with the new serial killer slasher person that has emerged and has targeted HBK. Real quick here, I don't think I've talked a lot about the art for The Slasher's Apprentice. And I think the reason for that is the art is serviceable. It's fine, but there's nothing super distinct or memorable about it, in my opinion, outside of maybe HBK's mask and the design for that. In any event, this issue gives us the rather predictable twist ending. I'm not going to tell you what it was, but if you were to hazard a guess, your first one would probably be correct. I don't think the twist that we see here is a bad one. I think that it's the natural play, really. But I do think the ending of this story needed a little extra kick. Either a different ending, or maybe you do the twist that they did and then add a second twist. The ending is basically underwhelming. That's what I'm saying. Still, I had a lot of fun with The Slasher's Apprentice. I mean, I'd be lying if I told you I didn't. If they wanted to come back for more with a sequel here, I'd be curious. I would just be open to them adding a little more garnish next time, as far as the story is concerned, and maybe another issue or two on top of that. It's a once-in-a-generation team-up event, ladies and gentlemen, as Marvel and DC unite to set an example of how we can all come together and unite. I'm sorry, what? Oh, it's not about that. What's it about? As Marvel and DC unite to make a bunch of money. But Yes, Marvel and DC are teaming up for the first time in a couple of decades, I think, to produce this Marvel/DC Deadpool/Batman #1, the first of 2 team-up specials that they're going to do this year. Marvel is publishing this, the first one, and DC is publishing the second one, which comes out in November. Both are headlined by Batman and Deadpool. So yeah, we've got a bunch of short, team-up stories in here featuring heroes from both sides. The headline story, naturally, is longer, though. Pretty simple. Deadpool comes to Gotham City hunting Batman, and eventually both heroes run afoul of the Joker. One thing that's pretty cool here is that there is no official digital edition of this book, at least not at the moment, as far as I know. The idea was to strictly do it in print to incentivize customers to come out to their local comic shops. I can definitely get behind that, and in the spirit of such things, I'm going to limit interior shots from this issue as much as I can. So you're going to see a lot of variant covers here. I'm not going to cover everything in this issue, but most of what we get here is fine. I mean, most Marvel and DC team-up stories are fine. With Marvel and DC stories, you usually don't have the page space to do much with a lot of substance to it. It's usually just about the novelty of this character being with this character, or that character going against that character, etc. And in that sense, this issue gives us pretty much what you would expect. I mean, I can't complain much about what we have here. Greg Capullo, who many people consider to be an all-time great Batman artist, draws the Deadpool-Batman team-up. Again, no complaints here. It looks great. And Zeb Wells writes a story that did legitimately get a couple of chuckles out of me. My favorite panel in the entire issue is this one, Deadpool climbing up onto the roof of police headquarters, asking, is this the line where we get to meet Batman? My favorite short story in the issue is actually the one that Chip Zdarsky writes and Terry and Rachel Dodson do the art for, a Captain America Wonder Woman team-up. It actually kind of feels like a real relationship between two people. Not relationship in the romantic sense, but, like a friendship that evolves and grows over time. We also get a meet story between Crypto and Jeff the Land Shark, which I thought was really charming. Frank Miller gets thrown a few pages in here to scribble down a story about his version of Batman, the Dark Knight Returns Batman meeting Old Man Logan. It is what it is. And the more I think about it, the more the Green Arrow Daredevil team-up story by Kevin Smith and Adam Kubert kind of overachieves. It's got a charm to it as well. Interestingly enough, conspicuous by their absence here, Superman and Spider-Man, arguably the 2 most iconic heroes from each company. No ideas? Couldn't come to an agreement? But yeah, this is probably going to wind up being one of the bigger issues, if not the biggest issue of the year, sales-wise. And I'm fine with that because it's a fine piece of business. And if it gets more people into comic shops, then to me it was all worthwhile. Flow #1. Oh boy. Flow #1 is a comic book that's not afraid to go there. You know where I'm talking about. So this story is about a young girl who goes away to camp where she gets her first period. But because she's been homeschooled and hasn't necessarily gotten the right kind of education about what's going on with her body, she becomes susceptible to manipulation and hazing and bullying from other girls. And naturally, because this is a horror story, said hazing and manipulation has horrific consequences. So this story is clearly designed to play into the uneasiness that people, men in particular, have about, I'm just going to say it, period stuff. and women's reproductive health in general, I guess. And I can appreciate the gutsiness that it takes by all parties involved to tell a kind of story like that, because I think the visceral, immediate reaction that a good amount of people are going to have to this is, ew, why would you do that? But I think that's kind of the idea. I think this book is sort of designed to a large extent to make unenlightened dude bros uncomfortable and, push the boundaries of what people are comfortable with and what they normally read about. And that's one of the things that horror stories can do. And I like that sort of thing. I like stories that invite you to expand your mind and your perspective, and certainly Flow is a story that's uniquely suited for the world of indie comics, because I doubt that you'd ever see this from a major comic book publisher, and certainly not a major like TV or motion picture distributor. It is a little bit Carrie-like in terms of the story. We've got a girl who's being hazed and presumably at some point will want to get back at the people that hazed her. The art in this book plays into the horror element really well. This is my favorite panel in the entire book. Your brain kind of goes over it thinking that nothing's wrong, and then it jumps when it sees the girl there. I always appreciate elements of truth in stories like this. And the tragic truth is that there are a lot of girls and young women around the world who don't have access to proper education about what goes on with their bodies at that age. It's really sad and tragic. And this book very much plays into that and kind of comments on it in its own way. And as the father of two young girls living in a post-Roe v. Wade era, I can very much appreciate that. It takes a lot of guts to do a story like this in the current climate, so I'm here for it. Happy Batman Day, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, it's Batman Day, the day that all Batman fans come together and celebrate. What's that? It's not Batman Day. Well, when was Batman Day? Okay, and what's today? Screw it, I'm just gonna call an audible. Happy Commissioner Gordon Day, everybody! That's right, as we all know, the day after Batman Day is traditionally Commissioner Gordon Day, and by sheer coincidence, Commissioner Gordon happens to be in the issue we're covering today, The Batman Second Night, #1. No joke, I've actually been looking forward to this for a while now. It's a sequel to The Batman First Night, which came out last year, and I actually gave that story an honorable mention among my favorite comics of 2024. Our author is Dan Jurgens, our artist is Mike Perkins, and our colorist is Mike Spicer. The first story was set in the year Batman was actually created, 1939, and this story takes place a year later in 1940. In this story, the Batman, hyphen and all, has to get to the bottom of a series of gruesome theatrical murders that are taking place in the city amidst the Great Depression. Meanwhile, Julie Madison returns home for a movie premiere in Gotham City, which is also being covered by Lois Lane. Yeah, Lois Lane is in this story. I don't know why. If they needed a female journalist character, the Vicky Vale character was right there, although if they're sticking with using the characters that were around in 1940, I guess Vicky Vale wasn't there then. Either way, though, I'm hoping that Lois Lane's inclusion here doesn't lead to a premature introduction of Superman into the First Night universe, although it's probably inevitable. But yeah, much like First Night, the art of Mike Perkins and Mike Spicer is really the highlight here. It's got a tremendous old Hollywood look, and it's some of the most gorgeous art you'll see all year. A 1940s take on a classic Batman villain is introduced here. I can dig that. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but I will tell you that it's not the Joker. And I can appreciate them not giving in to what I assume was the temptation to use the Joker. The only thing I really don't like about this issue is the title. Like the title of the story overall, Second Night. I remember when the third and final issue of First Night came out, I said, actually, boy, I hope they don't call the sequel Second Night. And lo and behold, that's what they did. Bad title notwithstanding, The Batman Second Night promises to be one of the most fun Batman comics of the year, so I encourage you to take a look.